Did I ever tell y'all that I absolutely love books and love reading and love life? What's going on, everyone? It's me, Troi, and I'm here, of course, with another video. Hopefully not being ate up by ants. And that man is up there cutting the grass. So it's like every time sometimes when I try to film a video, it's like when I get home, it's like I ain't trying to film no video because I'm trying to put on my mood lamp, make me a cup of decaf coffee and read my book. And I ain't got time to be putting all this stuff together after a long day. And then when I'm out here, it's just like, yeah, I just happen to run across all different types of elements, including people cutting grass. But everybody has a job to do. But anyway, I'm gonna try to make this quick and make it not as noisy, or hopefully I can reduce some noise. But I just want to share quickly some of the books that I read within the month of September that I want to come back and give you my resounding thoughts of. The first being that of C.J. Box's Open Season. I've got to say that I really did enjoy this book. Now, if we look at the premise, it has to do with this new game warden. His name is Joe Pickett. And he's like I said, the new game warden in this community, and the interesting thing about him as a character is that he's not exactly confident in his abilities of being a game warden, and it shows in his whole demeanor and presence and whatnot, and including the fact that, or per the book, he doesn't really know how to use a handgun very well, or he has terrible aim. But the premise is still, and as it concerns, detective fiction and whatnot, or mysteries or crime fiction, is that in the back of his backyard, one day he runs across the body of a man that he had a very problematic encounter with previously. This man is splayed across his wood pile, and this man has a cooler that contains small scat remains of a particular animal. So that's what launches the story about. What I got to say about this book is that, number one, it was a quick, easy weekend read for me, because once I started reading the book, I really couldn't let it go. When it comes to the high points, I love the fact that this character Joe is kind of like almost exteriorly, he is like the perfect image of the Stetson cap, Stetson cowboy hat, the Wrangler jeans, the big rough and tumble. The reason why I started this TBR in the first place, he has all that exterior look of someone who is like the big top, super intelligent, crafty, witty, game warden, private eye-esque black noir or noir fiction kind of guy. But internally, he's not a lot of those things. He's kind of the opposite. So I love that juxtaposed within his character. But one thing I loved about this book equally as much is, like, as someone who loves mysteries, one of my pet peeves is when there's a lot of family involved in the mystery, between the juggling of being parenthood and then the children and that sort of thing. Because, the kids always calls forth the parents' attention. And sometimes that could lead to these scenes that I find obnoxious personally, where the child character is basically with a backpack and a blanket running around going, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy, daddy," throughout the entirety of the book. This was completely different in the fact that Joe's two daughters, specifically his eldest daughter, had a very prominent role not only in the story, but she had skin in the game. She had skin in the game, so it was almost like it was Joe and his daughter solving the entire mystery the whole time. So yes, the open season was wonderful for me. I think that still, despite that, while it was driven mostly by character, despite that, it still was a very predictable story. You knew who the players were because they were in terms of like the adversarial characters. It was just kind of clear. It was clear. It was clear what was going on in terms of plot, and it was clear knowing who was the oppositional force involved. But I still enjoyed the story nonetheless, and I do look forward to reading the next book in that series. So after that, I read Robert Greer's The Devil's Backbone, the third book in his C.J. Floyd book. C.J. Floyd is his black bail bondsman who resides like in the Midwest, and the interesting thing about him and his character is that as a black man, who resides in this area, he kind of sticks out. But there really isn't a lot of that racial tension within these books as is. I mean, there's a little bit, but it's not heavy-handed, which I can appreciate at times, because I just like the fact that he shows up as a character who is strong and willing to go along with any challenge that he comes across. But this book has to do with one of his friends' friends found in a wetsuit thrown in this horse trout, this water trout. And, one of the underlying points to be made about this has to do with uh, this hidden mine of diamonds underneath this lake. And so that's kind of like what led slowly to his demise. But there's a host of different characters who populate this book, and there's like an A story and a B story that eventually converge upon one another. But at the end of the day, I think The Devil's Backbone was very exciting. It was also another book in which you knew, or I knew anyway, almost immediately who the culprit of all this manner of destruction was. But I love that. One of the things I love about these books is that there's always this conspiratorial and industrial tone to his books, to his mysteries. There's this professionalism, this white-collar crime, this business. I love these books where in the mystery there's a lot of sifting through records and business deals and backdoor deals, and slowly as the mystery plots forward and forward, there's this uncovering of this big conspiracy, if you will, this big financial conspiracy. So yeah, easily loved his books. Next, I tried to read The Cold Dish by Craig Johnson, and unfortunately this book became a DNF. The book opens up, and I'll tell you why. The book opens up with Craig Johnson's character, I forget, Longmire, getting a call that there's this body in the area. But as he goes about heading somewhere, getting in his car, I'm giving y'all confusion because this is how I felt. I'm just gonna give it to you real, right? He ends up stopping to get some beer to take to one of his friends, and as he's stopping at an intersection, he taps the shoulder of one of his deputies, I believe, some woman, his deputy, and tells her to go to the crime scene, the scene where the body is at. Meanwhile, he's driving around in his work vehicle, his work truck, sipping on a beer, and then he goes to this bar where his close friend, is busy talking about some electrical wiring and stuff. And I was just kind of like, I'm done, I'm through. I couldn't take it seriously. I'm sorry. I understood that the author was trying to build, some concreteness to this character, some concreteness to this setting, some concreteness to this story. But I just couldn't take it seriously. I just couldn't take the character Longhorn seriously. I'm sorry, y'all, for the fans of him. I just couldn't. I'm like, the whole time I was reading that, probably about, 20 or so pages or so, I was just like, when are we going to get to the body? And maybe that's just my meticulous nature. When it comes to reading mysteries, as always, I'm interested in what the author is going to do, but you have to keep me awake throughout that process. So once I start feeling like, well, I'd rather try something else, then that's kind of what the situation is going to require. So no, I didn't finish reading The Cold Dish. I'll keep it 100% real with you. I couldn't take the character seriously because he just didn't come across serious enough for me. And I'm pretty sure that he actually is throughout the story, but that was just too much heavy-handedness in trying to illustrate the designs of this character instead of actually us seeing the character in his profession at work. I would have got more from that instead of just, he's this guy who has this broken down shack that he's working. I ain't got time. So I decided to flip that and read the first Spencer book in Robert B. Parker's series, which was called The Godwulf Manuscript, which I happen to have a copy of. So I was like, I'm going to read this instead because it's short. It'll fill in that little gap of that DNF, and we'll see how this works. That book was really good, but I want to just make some things like concretely clear here. Number one, I was interested in reading Robert Parker because I know that, or from my understanding as someone who loves to read mysteries, a lot of times he gets touted as excellent at dialogue. And when it comes to his Spencer character and his interactions that I found within this book, that's true. That is true. This was just supremely witty, supremely funny, supremely charismatic. But the draw is that the Spencer character was so charismatic that he ended up sleeping with the wife of one of his one of his hired hands, as he's retained as a detective. He ended up sleeping with the wife and then sleeping with the daughter in a couple of chapters later. And that really honestly just put me off. I won't say like from this morality of thing and that sort of thing, but to be ultimately clear, the reason why I don't read or was had a lot of hesitations when it came to reading a lot of the noir novels, especially during that particular period of the early, like the Handlers, the Hammets, the Chandlers, and that sort of thing. The Hammets is because of that energy of these detectives and the women that swoon over them, and I could never just get into that. When it comes to this Spencer book, all I could see at this point was the wife in her negligee, feeling so downtrodden and so disabused and so neglected by her husband that she decides to sleep with this man that she hired to help her daughter, the detective. And then the daughter, who is so in this trauma phase, decides that she needs comfort in his, in that way, in that manner. It just kind of put me off. It was a stark reminder of why I don't read. I try to stay away from a lot of male characters when it comes to mysteries, because I can't get with that sometimes. But at the end of the day, I still think that the mystery itself was pretty decent. The dialogue, the mystery was great, but I'm just like, after the Spencer did all that with these two characters, I was just like, I ain't really feeling that. I'm not really feeling that. I just don't like seeing women characters in that position. So after that, I did read The Killer Inside of Me by, is it Jim or Tim? I don't have the book in front of me, but somebody Thompson. And this has to do with this police officer who is well known, reputable within his community, but underneath all that is complete and utter darkness, a very charismatic and rearranging of one's personality and character type of darkness. The gist of the story is that he is hired by this other police officer to stop his son from being wedded to what is known as like the town prostitute or whatnot, that sort of thing. And so he pays him to stop that. And once he does that, this character explodes. The story just kind of explodes from there, and it becomes a matter of him not only maintaining his facade, but also retracing his steps to stop from people, the actual law enforcement individuals, from seeing, as well as the community, from seeing who he really is as a killer. And it was just kind of nonstop at that point. At that point in the story, it was just nonstop, but he was ruthless. And although I think that at one point I did kind of check out in the book because I just was not resonating with a lot of, some of the things that he was doing, especially as it concerns his thought process for how he got rid of certain characters, which is what the story is about. I still managed to finish it off to the end because I wanted to see how the end result was going to be, or just what were the lengths in which he was going to go in order to absolve himself of all the darkness that he's carried and is now being witnessed and seen by other individuals within his community. So that was The Killer Inside of Me, and it was of course part of the top 100 mystery novel of all times reading list, and I'm happy I got it out of the way. So it was fairly dark. It was fairly dark, but we're looking at a psychopath, a sociopath, and a psychopath, or whichever one of these psychological terms you want to give him. He was crazy. We'll just say he was crazy, and boy, I felt for some of the characters who came across him. So those are basically all the books that I want to share that I did read within the month of September as it concerns that TBR that I put together. I did mention in that TBR that I was reading The Vampire Huntress Minion. That was phenomenal. I know L.A. Banks is rich at character and storytelling, but I really did forget how rich she actually was. Beautiful stuff right there. It had a little corniness to it, but it was still wonderful reading that book. Then I read Amity by Nathan Harris, which I'm still on the fence about how I resoundingly feel about that book. But you guys could definitely check out other booktubers who are doing a phenomenal job deconstructing that book, because for me it was just like I was getting into the groove of it, but there was a waning period that I came across eventually. But I'm currently reading Kristen Britton's Falling in the Sea of Stars that came out on September 30th. And I'm literally in the last 70 pages of this book, and I will be completely done with this big fat book that I've been reading since Tuesday, and today is Thursday. So I'm gonna be completing this. This is the 8th book in her Green Rider series, and I'm just gonna say this. I love these books because when it comes to fantasy novels, I love when authors activate my imagination. I love when authors do a good job of, when fantasy books, high fantasies, there's periods of traveling in between plot points. I love the setting. I love a lot of things about these books, but Kristen Britton knows how to overstay and draw out plot points, for long periods of time. And sometimes it feels like her books are filled with so much filler that by the end of the book, that's where all the good stuff is. And she does repeats a lot of plot points with her characters. A lot of stuff just goes on book after book, and these books are huge. So it often leads me to this point of what else is there to look forward to. But I will say that Falling in the Sea of Stars was much better for me, and my reading experience of this was much better than the one of the previous book that came out 3 years ago in 2021, because that one just floated along so much with various storylines that I just had to skim through the last, 200 pages or so. But this one is much more digestible, although it still has those same cantankerous moments of repeated information in past books, constantly repeating the plot points, constantly repeating challenges for these characters, especially that of Kerrigan, our main character. Every book she's gone missing. Every book she's going through this dilemma where she's in love with the king and the king is in love with her, but they can't be together or consummate their love, and because he has a wife, a queen, and children, and blah blah blah. The same stuff is like a lot of this stuff. I wish that Britain would cut the cord and let this character just do it. I'm ranting on. Well, anyway, we'll just leave it at that point, because after I read this, I have my copy of Sharp Force by Patricia Cornwell at home. So I can't wait to go home and get this one read. I'm going to finish this up today. But yeah, Falling in the Sea of Stars, it's just like, can we move this story forward? Can we move it forward? All right. But that's all I got for y'all today. I'm so happy I got the opportunity to do this. And then after I read Patricia Cornwell's Sharp Force, I want to go back to reading L.A. Banks, picking up with L.A. Banks books. And I really do want to kind of like push in some Anne Rice, because I want to read stuff that has to do with this particular season of October and Halloween. But anyway, there's a boat going by. Let me see if I can capture that for y'all. And this is the perfect way to end out this video. Look like that boat in the water. It looked like it was going to fall in the water in front of Greer.